have tried and tried to film like a new to BookTube tag, the BookTube newbie tag, several times, and it's failed every time. So instead, I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to talk about my reading habits, some of my favorite tropes, some of my favorite buzzwords, some of my favorite books, and just give you a little background into my reading life, my reading story, and hopefully that'll do just as good as doing a BookTube newbie tag. I've been a reader for my whole life. There's been some times when I've read more just what was required of me, like in middle school and high school, and then there was times when all I've been doing is reading for pleasure, like in college when I didn't have as much required reading. So that's when I really started to read more widely, more diverse, and actually look at my reading and track it. When I was in elementary school, I loved the kind of typical Babysitter's Club, the Babysitter's Club Little Sister books. Those ones were amazing to me. When it comes to my reading habits, I don't really have a lot of set times or anything that I like to read. I usually prefer to do it before I go to sleep, but the problem is I lay down in bed, I get cozy, I get comfortable, I get warm, and I just fall asleep. So there are some days when I won't read at all, and others when I wake up and I tell myself, we're going to read this morning, and I do it, and then we're going to read before bed, and we do it, and it gets done, and I make progress. I use an app called Bookly. I know it's been on Apple devices for like a really long time, but it's newer to Androids, and I started using that, and you can log how long you read, and it'll tell you how many pages you've read in that time, how many pages per hour, how much longer it'll take you to finish the book, everything like that. And I've been really enjoying using that because I find that it doesn't put me under pressure to read, but it does make me want to read more and faster and get things done. And I'm a fast reader already to begin with, and I don't really think that it hinders my ability to like process or analyze anything. So sometimes I'll read a lot of pages in a short amount of time, but then I'll only read that like 20 minutes for 3 days. So while I'm reading fast, I'm not necessarily getting books done fast, if that makes sense. So hopefully, I'm hoping that using this app will get me back into a rhythm of reading a lot of pages more than once per day. I'm not the kind of person that really likes building TBRs. I won't necessarily say I want to read this, this, and this in this amount of time. Sometimes I'll have stacks of books that I want to get to soon, but I never really put that requirement on myself if I want to finish this now and then this one next and then that one next, because usually it ends up changing anyways. I'm just a big mood reader, and I'll start something, and if it's not fitting my mood, if it's just not what I want, I have no problem pushing it to a side and starting something new. So yes, I do DNF things either because it's just not what I want at the current time or because I hate it. Most likely because I hate it. And when it comes to rating things, I'm not that critical really. Like, I'll finish a book and I'll know immediately if I want to give it 3 or 4 or 5 or 2 stars. And usually that rating will stick and it'll just be end of story. Liked it this much, I didn't like it this much. But sometimes I will go back and say, well, that one stuck with me a lot longer than I thought it would, or I forgot all about it and I don't think it was as good as right when I finished it. So I will adjust ratings. But usually what I give it right when I'm done is what I'm thinking, and that's how I continue to think as time goes on. I have been a lot less sparse with 5 stars this year. Usually I have no problem, like 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. But this year I've been struggling to find a lot that I'm in love with. So I've been giving a lot of 4s, some 4.5s, and yes, some 5s, but not as many as in previous years. And I've also just been reading a lot less this year. The first half of the year was horrible. Like, I was reading so slow, so few books, and not a lot of them were ones that I loved. I did have some gems that I'll talk about, obviously, as the year comes to a close, but it was just not working out for me at the beginning of the year. I wouldn't necessarily call it a slump, but it was a struggle. And now as the year is wrapping up, I'm much more in a groove. I'm reading steadily and I'm finding things that I like, not necessarily love, but I don't hate them. So I'm still enjoying what I'm reading. And so I guess the big question is, what do I like to read? What are my favorite things to read? What are my favorite genres? What kind of tropes or buzzwords do I look for? I like a lot of thrillers, a lot of mysteries. I like fantasy, but not necessarily high fantasy that has like 700-page books in a really long series with a really complex magic system, tons of characters, dragons. That's not really my thing. I like more low fantasy. Is that even what it's called? I don't know. I like contemporaries that deal with hard-hitting issues, or not necessarily just the fluffy romance, straightforward, you know what's going to happen ones. No offense to those, because I do read those too sometimes, but I definitely prefer ones that have more sensitive subjects in them. Some of my favorite buzzwords or tropes, whatever you want to call these, settings that are boarding schools, colleges, like more isolated, where everyone's in kind of one spot, and definitely thrillers and mysteries in these kind of settings. I love those. Witches, I've been really into witches this year. Serpent and Dove was great. I really liked that book. That definitely lived up to the hype for me. I like love stories that aren't straight and aren't cis. I identify as bisexual, and I like to read that kind of representation in my books as well. One of my favorite books of all time is probably no surprise. Everyone loves this book, I feel like. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. And I've read this 4 times, maybe 3 or 4. I'm thinking 4. And I love it every time. And this is just like the beginning of the iceberg of love stories like this that I enjoy. I'm also such a sucker for books that have mixed formats that aren't just straight prose. And Sadie is like it's told as a podcast transcript. I love things like this. I love this book. This cover is gorgeous. Everything about this is just great. But this isn't a Sadie book review. This is I like mixed format. I recently read Rules for Vanishing, and I absolutely loved that book. It has like the text conversations, transcripts of video and audio and interviews. That was amazing. So things like that, I'm such a sucker. It just draws me in. It makes it so much easier to read for me, and I'm obsessed with it. I also really enjoy books that are technically billed as adult, but that follow a child main character. And one of my favorites of these is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. This book's absolutely incredible. I've only read it once because I can't bring myself to do it again, but I really love this one. Another example of this would be Tell the Wolves I'm Home by Carol Rivka Brunt. I read that when I was in college, so years and years and years ago, but I loved it, and I will continue to love it and recommend it as this kind of, I don't know if it's a genre, it's adult, but it has a kid as the main character, whatever you want to call that. And then like some of my other favorite series and authors, I love Marie Lu. I love her Warcross duology and the Young Elites trilogy. I have book 3 because I don't have book 1 in physical, only book 2 and 3, but I loved this one. I really like Nina LaCour, and We Are Okay and Hold Still are my favorites of hers, and also this cover style is just impeccable. I love it. This year, I started reading Moira Foley Doyle. I've read all 3 of her books now. All the Bad Apples is definitely my favorite of the 3. This has so many things that I love about it, like a road trip, a group of friends, obviously queer characters. I really, really enjoyed this one. And if I was pressed, if someone demanded an answer out of me for my favorite books of all time, or my favorite book of all time, Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. But I love these books. I've read them twice, but I'm going to do a Grisha reread coming up in the next coming months and the beginning of next year. And so I'll definitely be reading these again. I love these books. I cannot talk about them enough. They're incredible. And it like watching Leigh Bardugo, starting with the Grisha trilogy, moving to these King of Scars, Ninth House, just watching how her writing progresses and how her stories just get deeper and more interesting and complex. She's definitely my favorite author if I was pressed to choose one. And I'm putting that statement out for all to know. So that's a little about me and my reading life, what I like to read, my reading habits, some of my favorites, and this definitely went a lot easier than filming a tag. I don't know why that was such a problem for me. I think just sitting in front of the camera like this instead of like vlogging or like when you're doing The Sims and you have something else to focus on, I just feel like I'm giving a speech, and I hated giving speeches. I always get so nervous and shy and awkward. So hopefully this isn't too bad. And if you have any questions about my reading habits, what I like, anything, leave them down below. Like and subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you again soon.